Start recording our event. We still have people coming in, but I'll get started with some announcements and then we can dive right into our conversation today about protecting the press. My name is Eric Peterson. I'm the president of the board of the Utah Headliners, chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists. We're so excited to have a great panel here on a really important topic. We're doing this as part of the SBJ Regional Conference. With the pandemic, things have changed up a little bit, and our conferences last year got pushed back, and we're doing them all virtual this year. And We're very excited to have everyone here. I'm going to put in the chat a few links. Tomorrow morning, we're also having another session that's talking about innovative nonprofit newsrooms in the West. Gonna have some great guests there. Gonna have Laura Gustus, the new editor of the Salt Lake Tribune, talking about the transition from a for-profit to a nonprofit. A lot of other interesting speakers from some local groups, including yours truly. And the main conference will also be tomorrow, starting at that'll start at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. And there's going to be a really great super session talking with some different people who collaborated on investigative projects, talking about how they did it, looking at stuff like climate change, impacts on poor neighborhoods, criminalization of homelessness. Some really interesting topics. There's going to be another session tomorrow, 12 to 1 Mountain Time, that's really about healthcare for, how reporters can kind of take care of their mental health. And it's been a stressful year, as we're going to be talking about in this panel. And there's a doctor there who's a former journalist and works with like first responders. Going to be having an interesting conversation there as well. And later in the afternoon tomorrow, 1:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, we're doing the Mark of Excellence Award, recognizing the best in student journalism in our region. Let's see. Also here in Utah, for our Utah journalists, our contest is open. We're taking entries for your best work from last year for the calendar year 2020. The website is contest.utahsbj.com. I'll put that in the chat as well. We're taking entries on that up until April 30th. So we're going to get started, and the way we're going to do it, we have attendees. Feel free to throw questions in the Q&A box as we go, and I'll try and work those in. And right now, I think I'll introduce our panelists for the event. We have Madison Lauterbach is the editor and founder of Ms. Mayhem, a Denver-based online news outlet. She graduated from MSU Denver in December 2019, Bachelor of Arts in Journalism and minor in Political Science. She's worked for the Metropolitan, Sentinel, Colorado, and the Daily Camera. Madison launched Ms. Mayhem in May 2020 and set out to build a grassroots publication that focused on the intersection of race, class, ability, gender, and sexual preference. The outlet predominantly features femme-identifying people who make waves in their communities and disrupt male-dominated industries. Very cool project. We've also got Spencer Heaps. Spencer is the Deputy Director of Photography at the Deseret News in Salt Lake City. He grew up in Massachusetts, studied photojournalism at Ohio University School of Visual Communication. In 2011, Spencer moved to Utah, where he served as a photojournalist and later the photo editor at the Daily Herald in Provo, before taking his current position at the Deseret News. John Wilson is the chief photographer at KSL 5 TV. He started his career in Lexington, Kentucky, where he worked 9 years as a sports producer and investigative photojournalist. In 2014, he made the move to Salt Lake City to lead the video storytellers at KSL 5 television. John specializes in character-driven stories done on deadline. Wilson is a 20-time Regional Emmy Award winner as a producer and photojournalist, 3-time Edward R. Murrow Award winner and the 2013 National Press Photographers Association Regional Photographer of the Year. Under his direction, KSL has been named National Press Photographers Association West Top Station of the Year in 2017, 2018, and 2019. And Trent Nelson has documented the people of Utah for the Salt Lake Tribune since 1995, earning 5 News Photographer of the Year titles. Working with multiple Tribune reporters, Trent has covered the modern history of polygamy throughout the American West with a focus on the followers of Warren Jeffs' Fundamentalist Church of Latter-day Saints. In 2020, he and the rest of the Tribune photo staff extensively covered rallies and protests against police violence. Thank you so much, all for taking part in this super important conversation. I think that the way to get started is really talking about, especially everyone's experience in the last year, as it was so tumultuous. And I'd just like to see if everyone could kind of talk about what their experience was like covering different things, protests, about against police violence, other situations, other demonstrations that turned out to be violent or threatening in certain ways. So let's start there by just discussing what kind of everyone went through, specifically in the last year, and also what have we learned from those particular situations going forward. Trent, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, sure. We starting at the end of May, we have a small photo team of 4 people. With COVID going on, we weren't getting a lot of assignments, so we were just out in the streets seemingly every day at rallies. Sometimes 1 or 2 of us, sometimes all 4 of us. And wow, it was a long year. There were days where days on end of covering different social movements, because here in Utah we've also had like anti-mask events, we've had pro-Trump events. It's not just been like Black Lives Matter groups, but we kind of get lulled into a sense of security here in Utah because generally people are nice and you don't expect things to go wrong. But we had a few close calls, and on January 6th, one of our photographers was pepper sprayed at kind of that insurrection event at our state capitol. And really at that point, we realized we hadn't really made a lot of plans. We were kind of operating on instinct and street sense, so that was kind of where it all ended for us, as far as just kind of taking it casually. If I could, I mean, not to put down what we did, because we always took things seriously, but you know what I'm saying, we were kind of unorganized about it. But that's what our summer was like. It went on for days and days and days, and we were out there at a lot of it. So.
And Madison, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, we actually launched in May last year. So we, put out a few stories at the end of May, and then pretty much right away, the protests started here in Denver. And our team is so small that we had like 3 or 4 people out there that were doing writing, live coverage, photo, video, all of that for almost a full week. The first 4 days I was out there myself for about 15 hours a day. And yeah, it has been really interesting covering that, especially as such a small group of people. We can't cycle our reporters out like some other outlets might be able to. So, like, as I mentioned, we were working really long days, and it was really emotional as well. Just, the experience of being out there and having, stuff happen to us. And yeah, it was pretty hectic. Especially for not having much experience doing that before. So, yeah.
Let's see, John, you want to go next?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, starting at the end of May 30th, I guess, with the first big protest. As far as a television station, we immediately jumped into full live coverage that day, and we went through the afternoon and into the evening. I think all of our photojournalists, if not almost all of them, were on the streets in downtown Salt Lake City that day, the first protest, and then the subsequent ones that followed. And then throughout the summer, as the manager of the staff, I'm in the mix a lot of those protests. I'm on the roof in Provo at that protest, and on the balcony at outside the district attorney's office at that one, but then also just scheduling the photographers who are going to be going to these protests. In television, it is a lot of planning. We are anticipating what we think is going to happen and then reacting once something does happen and how we're going to cover it, and then trying to plan and anticipate the next one. So it was a lot of that all summer long, and even leading into January of this year. So it was a very interesting ride.
Okay, Spencer.
Yeah, as Trent and John said, really, while we've covered protests on the street plenty here in Salt Lake, that May 30th one was a bit of a wake up call. I was assigned to initially cover that, and honestly, we didn't expect a lot out of it. It was supposed to be a car caravan where people were driving and honking. So I went to cover, and we're probably doing photos only. And as soon as we saw the number of people on foot, I was on the phone with my editor saying, you probably want to assign a writer and bail on whatever else you're doing. And then, of course, things got a little haywire from there. But that was a bit of a wake up, just in terms of we haven't seen kind of violent protest in Salt Lake very much, with property destruction. And so we can talk more certainly about how that day unfolded. But I would say, and COVID, added a whole different layer. While we already, we're well into masking, I would say that protest, certainly a lot of the participants weren't well masked, and talked to some who weren't really buying into COVID as a thing. But later protests that changed a bit. But I still think I didn't experience any animosity toward the press at most of the summer's anti-police brutality, anti-racism protests. And that's something that I think we're fortunate for here in Utah. Talking to journalists in other cities, it's certainly, the press can be a target from any end of the political spectrum. And it certainly became, we started to have some greater concerns later in the year, close to the election, with some of the right-wing demonstrations that happened, and took some kind of reevaluated our protection protocols in the wake of some of those events.
Let's just stick with that theme a little bit then, and talk more specifically about what did you guys decide to do differently going forward? How did you change your protocols, or perhaps develop them for the first time? It seems like last year certainly was a wake-up call in a lot of regards for journalists covering these events. So what have you done, or what do you think needs to be done? You want to start us off, Trent?
Yeah, one of the things we realized when one of our staffers was attacked, just out of the blue attacked, is that our number one priority is safety of our people. That's number one. And so we specifically laid out what we're going to do if hopefully it never does, but if something like that happens again, and that's, get your colleague or yourself to safety, sound the alarm, and get some aid for that person, and just reassess your safety. There were times where I remember one time Spencer and I we're at competing outlets, but we both found ourselves at a protest where there were people whose identities were completely concealed, carrying baseball bats, and another person holding a rifle. And sometimes you have to reach out to your competition and say, hey, we better stick together on this, because I don't know if a person holding a bat wants their photo taken, you know, but if we're together, we at least have each other's back. So that was a big thing we implemented for ourselves too, was we're going to work in pairs. We're going to find a safe place to park. We're going to get our communications in line so we know how to communicate. Like, are we going to do texts? Are we going to do Slack? And then another one, and then I'll let somebody else talk. But we found that it's very important to have somebody back in the office or away from the location be in on the communication as well. So if something goes down, you have someone who's not there who can give a real objective, reasoned opinion on things, or alert to get help to you, or something like that. You don't want to just be an island out at one of these events.
Let's see, Madison, you want to go?
Yeah, so building off of what Trent said, we definitely discovered pretty quickly after the first night that we needed to work in pairs at the very least, and that no one was going off on their own, at least for an extended period of time. We had, it was definitely a challenge to keep together, you know, in a pair or in a group, especially when, you know, people start running away from the cops and, you know, we trip or whatever. It gets pretty difficult. But, you know, fortunately in Denver, we actually don't have open carry. So it wasn't really a threat of, you know, being shot or any of that necessarily. But we did definitely have challenges with the police. So that was an interesting thing. And we kind of evolved our operation a little bit. You know, the first few days that we were out there, we just had makeshift press badges because we were so new, we hadn't gotten any made. So obviously that was our first priority, is to get real press badges. Second priority was to get like high-vis vests and stuff that was going to make us stick out in the crowd, so that everyone was aware that we were journalists. And that actually sometimes was not the best idea. Sometimes you want to blend in a little bit more, because being a journalist can make you a target on both sides, you know, protesters and police. But yeah, it was, we learned everything on the fly, especially as I mentioned, we didn't have much experience covering these kind of protests before, that were so intense and so chaotic. So yeah, we just had to develop our strategy as we went.
And John, I'll go next.
Yeah, to reiterate everything that they said, I mean, but then also to give you kind of the perspective of television, the first day, the May 30th protest starts, just like Spencer said, we're just covering it. We're just trying to figure out what's going on. And then suddenly realize this is a huge news event. And now it's a live television event, essentially, for us. That brings in a whole other element of interest, because we then have to have reporters with photographers, and then we're covering that essentially that first day like a breaking news event, like any other one that we've been trained to do. We're kind of running into the middle of it. After that, beyond that, there was definitely a kind of, all right, well, that might not have been the best way to handle this huge breaking news event. And so then from there on, it was a lot more, okay, how do we protect our people? We're definitely pairing them up. And then we ultimately, very soon after that first protest, decided that we were never going to have any crew that was smaller than 3 as far as a television crew, because the photographer and the reporter are both doing live television at that moment. It's almost impossible for them to even watch each other's back when they're both doing live TV. So we always had, and we always tried to have another photojournalist as the third member of the crew, so that just practically they could take over the camera, or they just know kind of the lay of the land of just what a live shot is. But there were protests where we had people from our assignment desk, producers, associate producers, anybody who was just could be another set of eyes to kind of have our back in that environment. You know, just things like having just extra water and snacks and things that you wouldn't even kind of think about running into that initial protest. You're just going in to cover this event, ended up becoming a big part of our planning for subsequent protests, because that ended up being that first night. My job ended up being just running batteries and drinks to people, because that ended up being such a huge, that was going to be the thing that shut our shut our newscast down at that point. So yeah, it was very much kind of an evolution from one protest to the next, in the way I think our presence was reacted to from both sides, but then also in the way we felt was like the best and safest way to cover. I feel like most of our conversations in all of our planning ended up being, how do we do this safer than we did it last time? How can we do this? You know, we want to cover this, but we also want to be safe out there.
And Spencer.
Yeah, I wonder if this will let me share my screen. So after the January 6th situation at the insurrection, I'll say, at the US Capitol, and in the face of some looming threats here in Utah and all the state capitals, I attended a number of panels with the AP. I think there was an SPJ one, and kind of an informal group of photo editors, and worked on kind of honing a little one sheet to help guide some people. A lot of this has been talked about already, but I mean, this here at the top is the main thing. It's not worth your life. It's not worth injury. You know, knowing when to leave is the most important thing. And we've really, through COVID and the protests, our number one message as editors to our photographers is, you're the boots on the ground. We're not going to make a habit of trying to second guess your judgment. You're the one who's there. You have the power to say, we're leaving. Hopefully there's a way to mitigate any situations and get us something. But if it means we have no coverage, then so be it. Just leave. But as Trent talked about, as everyone mentioned, you know, buddy system, whether that's someone else at your outlet or with a competing outlet. Photographers like to be independent and get something no one else has, but this can really be a lifesaver. So deal with the fact that you might have a similar looking photo to someone else, but I think you'll find a way to put your spin on it. Just be cognizant that photographers and reporters are kind of an awkward pair. They need different things. Photographers want to move. Reporters need to gather info and do some interviews. And reporters be aware that photographers can't, you know, they get tunnel vision when they're looking through a viewfinder. So you're the eyes to the sides and back when your buddy's photographing. Offsite contact is big. We started using an app called Life 360 so that editors can see where you are in the field at a given time. And we had a protocol that you don't shut that off until you have driven away from the event, knowing that your transit between an event and your parking spot, especially at night, is a really vulnerable place to be. So not giving that all clear until you're truly off and safe. You know, when you're out there, knowing your escape routes ahead of time, where can you go? You know, is there a place to cover if there's gunfire? Versus is there a place to hide if you haven't been identified? I already talked about this transit to and from. So we talked a lot about considering your appearance. You know, don't wear all black. If you're going to a right-wing protest, you're liable to be fingered as an Antifa member. You know, don't wear colors that align you with a certain group, like red, or you know, American flag apparel, black, as we talked about, yellow, orange hats have all become a thing, kind of limiting on your wardrobe selection these days. But just take into consideration where you're going. Straps, don't wear a camera around your neck. That's a really great way for someone to pull you back. You might need a backpack because you want to have some gear, some snacks, some PPE with you, but be aware that's an easy thing to grab onto. The consensus kind of after January 6th and going into the state things that never really came to fruition was probably the over-under is better to conceal your press IDs, but you do need something on you. If you are dealing with law enforcement, you need to be able to identify yourself. So something to pull out of your pocket. I've taken to keeping a retired press ID in my wallet. One of the New York Times photographers who was assaulted at the US Capitol, they stole her credentials, and then police held her at gunpoint until some people came to vouch for her because she had no way to show that she was allowed to be in there. But de-escalation, if it comes to it, fighting is probably not the best course of action. Do everything you can to de-escalate, and like we said, leave. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get in your face, I'm out of here, I just want to leave. And considering your parking, that you're not going to get blocked in, and that's a little bit farther from the event, but not too far to use as a refuge.
That was great. All right, thank you for that, Spencer. Let's see. Let's talk about law enforcement. How's been people's experience working with law enforcement at these events, and what it seems to me that there's a question of like, what is an appropriate amount to work with like a law enforcement, right? What should interactions be like with law enforcement? Should it just be as simple as showing them that press badge when you need to, or do you feel the need to coordinate with them at the event, talk to them about parameters and boundaries and things like that, or is that something you shouldn't do? I'm genuinely curious myself. Maybe to mix it up, let's start with you, Spencer. Do you want to start that one off?
Sure. That's a great question. I think you'll have to figure that out a little bit on the fly. I'd say all in all in Utah, we've received pretty good cooperation from law enforcement. I've never had issues in the field at these events. I've had plenty of issues at other things like crime scenes with testy law enforcement, but have received pretty lenient access from the law enforcement here. When we were prepping for the expected state capitol protests early this year, media did send representatives to meet with state troopers up at the Capitol and kind of talk about what their tactics are going to be and where might be safe for us. And they basically said, it's not our job. We're going to look out for everybody here. It'd be great to know, hey, these folks standing here are journalists, but push comes to shove, we're not going to make it our job to stand there and defend you, which I think is totally fair. But we've received pretty good cooperation from them. I don't know what more to say about that. Yeah.
John.
Yeah, I think it honestly changed a little bit depending on the community that you were in. The protests in downtown Salt Lake City were almost managed a little differently than some of the protests we saw in Utah County and Provo. I know after the shooting during the protests in Provo, the next one that ended up having a large counter protest, we kind of huddled even with the police beforehand, not as just kind of an informal, like them telling us what they were going to do, us kind of telling them what our plan was. At that point, we had gotten a business that we could be on the roof kind of looking down so that we could essentially be, go down into the middle of the protest, but then also a kind of a safe retreat area if things did go bad. So in that regard, I mean, it was just kind of, I think as the protests kind of progressed throughout the summer, the way the police also kind of had a plan and managed us in a way in the information that they were going to give us versus kind of what Spencer said, just we're not here to protect you guys either. I think that kind of also evolved through the whole process.
Just for the benefit of our attendees or guests not from Utah, we had a situation in Provo in Utah County, protest. I believe it was a Black Lives Matter protest, and a man drove up on a sidewalk and started looking like he was going to go through the crowd, and somebody in the protest shot him. And immediately after that is really when here in Utah, we had this phenomenon of this a kind of a militia called the Utah Citizens Alarm start showing up at every protest, and they show up in full tactical gear, and just add another element, something everybody's got to keep their eyes on while they're trying to do their job. Oh wait, Madison, what was your experience with law enforcement?
Yeah, so we, outside of, writing kind of roundup articles, we would obviously contact police and get information from them. But at the events themselves, we did not have contact with them because alerting them to the fact that we were police actually made us more of a target to them, it seemed like. We had several instances where we were told by police that they didn't care that we were journalists, or just various things that happened. There was one day after we had gotten our official press badges, where we were following a group of protesters, few hundred, that were walking down a major street here in Denver. And the police ended up bracketing them in a neighborhood block. And we got stuck in the middle of that. And we were right by one of the police lines. And, of course, protesters were kind of aggravating the police and yelling and throwing empty water bottles. And they started to tear gas on the other side of us. And I saw the situation escalating pretty quickly and looked at one of the police members, held up my press badge, yelled press, put my hands in the air, and he started shooting pepper balls at my feet. So that was an interesting experience. And I have quite a few stories like that where I was shot with pepper balls in the backs of my legs, where a tear gas canister was shot pretty much directly at me. We were yelled at by police after there was a city curfew, and journalists were exempt from this curfew, but we were told to basically get the F out of here, and that they didn't care that we had press badges. So we found that they were not very cooperative when we wanted to, get more information, or speak with them at events, or, even find shelter with them. So yeah, that was interesting to say the least.
Yikes. Wow. Okay, Trent.
Yeah, this could be a whole another hour long topic, couldn't it? I think for me, I think that I would say you'll find that if the situation is a pre-planned thing that's coming up, or if it's something where the police have a chance to make a plan and at least know what they think will happen, they're a lot easier to work with. But if there's all of a sudden a mass march over to the police station or something where they're having to react on the fly to an emotional crowd, you really can't count on anything. And another thing that I think is really important is when you're at an event with two different sides or whatever it is like that, with police and protest or whatever the different groups are, you got to be very careful that you don't, like, say they let you behind the police line and then you're over chatting up with the police and telling jokes or laughing and sharing conversation, which is a normal human thing to do. Same with doing that with protesters necessarily. It's like, that's not your job. You need to be not seen as, you know, you're on this side or on that side. It can get you into some real problems. I've seen some photographers who are kind of getting a little too chummy as far as how I would do it, because I don't want to be on anybody's team, you know, because that can really go against you. And, you know, another thing that's important to realize is, you kind of brought this up, Eric, talking about the Utah citizens alarm. We found that very quickly, these political groups that we were covering, and this could be any one of them on any position, they were developing their own kind of security teams. And if they didn't know who you were, if you came in with a camera and you were a stranger and you were taking pictures of the group, they could quickly, at worst, just take you out of there physically, but at least harass you. And so, and like I said, we saw this with everybody. So it really paid off to kind of be a familiar face to the group. I like Spencer's sheet with all the tips. One thing I was doing is kind of trying to look the same every time I went out so that I was recognizable. And that won't save you when things go really bad, that they know who you are, because, you know, you're not one of them. You're a journalist, you're a different group. But you need to be aware that they're really serious about protecting themselves, you know, from being doxxed or from the other side. And I even saw a group of one political group marching someone out of a free public area, and the police just kind of standing by letting it happen. I mean, that's the other thing about the police is when stuff's going on, I believe they're making risk calculations. Like, is it worth getting involved to stop this incident, or will it create a bigger incident? So we'll just let that, you know, abuse happen, you know. And I mean, those are just some thoughts on some of those issues.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on something you just mentioned, Trent. And I have to admit, like, you know, covering these types of events is not something I've typically done, but I have heard more recently kind of this concern, I guess, about, you know, being doxxed. And I've heard complaints, you know, about reporters going out, and then it's not necessarily, you know, physical violence or anything from like any type of demonstrator, but demonstrators that will try and block cameras, be very aggressive about, you know, the idea that they would be on TV or, you know, in the news. And, you know, at my core, that strikes me as strange that you're doing a public demonstration, but you don't want to be seen. But I also understand there's a lot of different reasons for different groups why that's the case. And I'm not exactly sure what's the best way to explain that kind of phenomenon to different groups that are a lot more sensitive about that issue than they might have been in years past. I don't know if that's even well, you know, maybe that's not a discussion that you guys have the final say on, but being in the front lines, I imagine you have a lot of thoughts on that. So how is the best way to, like, I don't know, maybe be an ambassador to these people and explain what you do and why it's important that you're able to, like, cover these things? Let's see. Madison, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, so we actually struggled with that throughout the summer, deciding what we were going to do in terms of shielding people's faces in photos, not using their names in captions, etc. We had many discussions about it. Earlier in the summer, we, you know, kind of took that hard line of, well, you're on a public, like, sidewalk. We can take your photo. You know, if you don't want your face shown, don't show it, etc. But throughout the summer, as protesters were arrested because of the police using photos that photojournalists had taken, and protesters disappearing or being killed, we kind of evolved on that and chose to do what we saw as the responsible thing of basically limiting their exposure, the protesters' exposure. So, making sure that faces were obscured in some way if we didn't have direct consent from them to, have their face in the photo. We also stopped publishing full names in captions. Obviously, we got that for our own records, but we stopped publishing them. Yeah, it was a really difficult thing to do. And I think that helped us build some trust with the community here. When we decided to do that and some other outlets decided to hold on to the hard line, I think that it showed, obviously maybe not the police, but protesters on all sides, that we were safe to talk to. And I think that that's the most important thing about being a journalist, is conveying to your sources that you are a safe person to talk to, because those stories need to be told. But otherwise, all you can do is go into a group and say, hey, this story is really important. I need this, I need this information to get this story out there. And, just keep working to get people to talk to you, I guess. Yeah.
Great, thanks. John, you want to go next on that one?
Yeah, we obviously dealt with this quite a bit. From a television standpoint, we're extremely visible, large cameras, transmission packs live, a reporter with a microphone. It's really hard to not look like a TV crew when you are one. Especially as the I don't think we noticed this at all during the initial May 30th protests, like protesters trying to obscure our cameras or anything like that. And then that part of this evolved very quickly. Every additional protest you would experience kind of a greater and greater degree of sophistication on their part in recognizing who we were. We even had photographers who they knew their name, and I guess they had just looked at their press badge and they'd seen them from one protest to the next, and we're calling them by their first name, which was a little, kind of unnerving. But specifically at the protest at the district attorney's office in downtown, they had black umbrellas that they had brought for the specific purpose of placing them in front of our camera. And at that point, it's becoming almost like an overly confrontational thing for us. We're then becoming like a part of this event rather than trying to document it. Our choice at that point was to just remove ourselves to the point where they stopped actively interacting with us and covering it from a distance. And that's what that's the tough balance as a journalist, that we're here trying to tell their story. They're obviously doing a public demonstration. They're wanting to get a message out to someone. We are here. We're literally a microphone for them to do that. So as a journalist, you almost do feel offended. You're not there as a one-sided person. You're not on one side or the other of the discussion. You're there to share each point of view. And so it does get frustrating when they do look at you as we don't, and they said a lot of times, we don't need you. We have our own social media. We have our own this and that. And so, yeah, that was probably, for me as a journalist, the most frustrating part of the entire summer, was trying to do that part of the job. You obviously have a message you want to get out. We are, for a lot of people who wouldn't otherwise hear your message, this is the way they're going to hear it, and you're kind of shutting us out. That, for me as a journalist, was probably the most frustrating part of all the coverage.
Oh, wow. Trent, you want to go next?
Yeah, this is really interesting to me because looking back, I think I would do things a little differently in this. I'm a real hardcore photojournalist. I want to photograph anything going on in front of me, anyone on a public area, especially in a historic moment. And if somebody says, don't show the protesters from this group, but then the next week, the other group is doing something that makes them look bad. Group A wants photos of group B looking bad. You know, you get into this mix where you're not making a rule based on legality, you're making it based on a political reason or to support or protect. So I mean, you always want to protect people who need to be protected in this field, that's for sure. But what I was going to say, what I wish I had done better when we started to get this question last year of don't show our faces, why are you showing our faces? I wish we had sat down as an organization and written out an answer with our best minds to say, here's why we're doing this. So there was some communication, and I think that would have helped, because instead we were kind of just answering on the fly. But I thought that would be important, and we're going to be working on that at the Tribune for this year. But the other thing to say about this issue is, if you get confronted, if you're in a confrontation in any kind of assignment, like it said on Spencer's sheet, de-escalation is the best. Water goes around an object, you know, you're not going to win an argument on one of these scenes. Back away, find another route, de-escalate, take the emotion out of the situation. It's really the best thing you can do. And they have a right to hold up an umbrella. They have a right to hold up a sign. The best you can try to do is reason as a human. And if things start to get heated, move away. And you'll also find that there are people who you can talk to at these events. And then there are people who, for whatever their situation, are not going to listen to you. And things are only going to get bad for you. And so you need to know this is the time to move away and give up this specific fight, you know.
And let's see, Spencer, go.
Yeah, as Trent said, it's really hard to have a conversation about the nuances of the freedom of the press and the role that we play when you're out in the street with someone. I think we'd all love to get into the weeds with someone about the First Amendment and what the same rights you have out here give me the right to be here, but it's pretty hard, if not impossible, to do that. So the one thing that I just like to fall back on that seems to take a little bit of the heat out of people is, I'm just trying to do my job. You know, I go where they tell me, you know, what are you doing here? Like, hey man, I just was assigned to come down here. I'm just trying to do my job. Or, you know, if people are giving you greater questions about, well, you can cover my face, you know, this and that. You know, I love to just throw my editor under the bus. Like, hey man, yeah, I'll take it to my boss. You know, oh, I don't know. You know, they said I need to cover this side. You know, just, you know, feel free to say, hey, it's the editors back at the office, man. You know, here's a phone number or an email address, and try to just explain that, you know, you're kind of the grunt. You're out here trying to do your job the best way, you know how. And I think that's kind of taken some of the heat out of some people who've gotten in my face a little bit. And yeah, as Trent said, it's just hard. You can't arbitrate who, it's hard to arbitrate, you know, who's deserving of protection and who's not. And so right now I'm just trying to approach things just, what's the best way to do this fairly as a journalist, you know, make a call based on the newsworthiness of what's in front of you, and not get too in the weeds in the moment of what's there. Definitely something you can analyze with more nuance with your editor after the fact. And then I would say I still am trying to get names as much as I can. Hey, I'm Spencer Heaps. I'm with the Deseret News. I got this great photo of you. Do you mind if I get your name? And I still, at most of them, get most yeses and very few, no, don't use my pictures. With the militia groups, I don't know if I've gotten anyone's name ever. But I also think both sides are savvy about understanding when they're visible and that the press is there, and that covering their face if they're committing a crime or don't want to be ID'd is something they can take, into their own hands. And even had protesters go, hey, put your mask on, cover your face, hey, and gone and tried to shield other people's faces, and fair enough for them. So I think they have some agency and know what to do in that case.
Great. Yeah, I like the throwing the editor under the bus tactic. I used to be a bartender, and when I had to cut somebody off, it was the same thing. I didn't get into an argument about it. I was like, "Sorry, my manager says," um, probably got time for one more. We got a good question from one of our attendees. It's kind of a two-parter. They said, any tips on how you debrief after covering protests and riots, and what do you do to stay sane mentally? And especially, summer long of protests, that takes a toll on a lot of folks. So, John, let's start with you this time.
I'm not sure I did stay sane mentally, so I'm not sure I can answer that one. Debriefing from the protests ended up, one good thing that came kind of from this, I think with television, and I'm sure any newsroom, it becomes very kind of like newsroom centric in a lot of ways, where the smart people are sending the dumb people out to do stories a lot of times. And this, I think this specifically, as we were rolling back in from these protests and stuff, there was I think there was a lot of respect gained for the people in the field and their like ability to make like really well thought out journalistic decisions, to the point where a lot of our debriefs came down to, it's your guys, you know what's in front of you, you know what you're experiencing, you know what's dangerous and what's not. We're putting this in your court, we're putting this ball in your court. You guys need to make the strong decisions, because I think that ultimately ended up, we could plan as much as we wanted to. It really come down to, who's out there, boots on the ground, and what are they experiencing, and us just kind of reinforcing to them, we trust you, we know what you're doing, we're gonna have your back no matter what happens. That was the best thing for me that kind of came out of the debrief sessions, was that like, okay, that I think sometimes the managers in the newsroom need to kind of learn to have that trust in their people in the field. And I think if anything good came out of it, that was one of them.
Let's see, Madison, you want to go?
Yeah, as John said, it was pretty hard to stay sane mentally. Yeah, I mean, really the best thing for me personally after covering as many days as I did last summer, the best thing for me was to just talk with my colleagues about it, and talk with them about how they felt, and what they experienced, and not only put it in perspective, but just talk through it. I mean, it was basically like therapy, especially because as small of an outlet as we are, we can't afford to help pay for therapy for everyone. So yeah, talking with the group, and even talking with those reporters that are not the breaking news reporters that we didn't send out to cover the protests, talking with them about it helped a lot too. But honestly, yeah, it is definitely very difficult to stay sane and just process everything. So.
All right, Spencer, you want to go next?
Yeah, nothing revelatory from me, just having someone good, a friend, a partner, a colleague to talk to about the experiences can be really cathartic. This relates also to the kind of protecting of identities and stuff. I really limited my social media posting about it, and I don't participate in Twitter anymore at all. I think that obviously I have an obligation to file all of my photos for my outlet and for us to play our role in covering things. But one thing I don't need to do is put everyone's pictures on Twitter where they're easily shared by groups who may be hostile to one another, and to give myself the opportunity to get into personal discussions or be personally attacked. Twitter and social media can be an incredibly valuable space for distributing news. So in some ways, maybe I'm just copping out on that, but I just don't need that. And so I think, you could just cut some social media out of your life and save yourself a little grief there.
Yes, I agree. Trent, you want to finish on that one?
Yeah, this one, thankfully I had some time to think while you were all speaking, and I love what you all had to say. For me personally, music really helped me out. After a long night, I had some specific songs I would listen to, but what's interesting to think about is that you're out there photographing a mother whose son was shot, or a group who's been historically oppressed, or whatever it is. And I think that, I don't know if that helps or what, but when I think about how I feel versus how they feel, my inconvenience at being blocked at taking a photo or being in an argument is probably pretty minor compared to what they are complaining about in a lot of these cases that we dealt with this last year. And so I often have thought recently about all the mothers I've photographed over the years, just devastated at a loss of a child or something. And so I don't know. I mean, I guess I try to just put it in perspective. Yes, there's a serious issue with how do we stay healthy mentally with what we do. But at the same time, I guess I can take some solace from these people allow us to document their worst moments, and hopefully something good is coming from that, because what we did last summer was cover a historic thing that will be looked back on for decades. And so if we experience some nervousness and some even going back night after night to the same type of event, this kind of thing that you can get, oh, this is kind of annoying, I have to do this again. In the long, big historic picture, that's nothing compared to what we accomplish. And that's something to keep in mind, that what you do is going to have reverberation, if I said the word right, but it's going to have waves for years and generations and lives that we touch. So, that's what I think of when I worry about how I feel,
Beautiful. All right, that was excellent, and we're right about 1 o'clock, so I think we're gonna call that good. And thank you so much to our panelists. This was a really great discussion. Really appreciate it. Really important discussion, and we've been recording this, so hopefully, if the recording doesn't crash my computer, we'll get that uploaded too for folks to check out. But yeah, again, from the Utah SPJ, thank you so much for your help, and thanks everyone for attending and taking part. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.